Jake Morrison stood in front of the mirror in his small cabin aboard the Earthship UES Horizon. He adjusted his blue uniform one more time and took a deep breath. Today was the day that would change everything for humanity. After 300 years of searching the stars, they had finally found other intelligent life. Not just one species, but 47 different alien races that formed something called the Galactic Confederation. The ship hummed quietly around him as it moved through space toward Nexus Prime, a massive space station that served as neutral ground for meetings between different species. Jake had been chosen to lead the human delegation because of his calm nature and ability to think quickly under pressure. He was 42 years old, had served in the Earth Space Navy for 20 years, and had never been more nervous in his life. A soft knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called out. Dr. Lisa Carter entered, carrying a tablet full of notes. She was the team's language expert, a brilliant woman who had spent the last 5 years learning everything she could about alien communication methods. Her brown hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her green eyes showed both excitement and worry. "The preliminary reports are fascinating, Jake," she said, sitting down on the small chair by his desk. "The Zephyrians communicate through crystal vibrations that create harmonic patterns. The Kalari use precise mathematical clicking sounds. The Vortex speak by releasing different chemical gases that somehow form words when translated." Jake shook his head in amazement. "And they all understand each other?" "They have universal translators, but more importantly, they all communicate in very logical, direct ways. No emotion, no casual conversation, no jokes or stories. Everything is factual and efficient." Lisa paused and looked at her notes again. "Jake, I'm not sure they're going to understand us very well." Dr. Kevin Brooks, the team's cultural expert, appeared in the doorway. He was a tall, thin man with gray hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "The captain says we'll dock at Nexus Prime in 2 hours. Are you ready for this?" Jake straightened his shoulders. "As ready as anyone can be for meeting 47 different alien species for the first time." Kevin smiled. "Just remember, they're probably as nervous about meeting us as we are about meeting them." "Well, if they get nervous..." "The reports suggest they don't experience emotions the way we do." 2 hours later, Jake found himself walking through the corridors of Nexus Prime. The station was enormous, with ceilings that stretched high above and walls made of some kind of smooth, gray material that seemed to glow with its own light. The air smelled clean but strange. Like metal and ozone mixed together, other beings moved through the corridors around them, and Jake tried not to stare. A group of Zephyrians glided past, their crystal bodies catching the light and throwing rainbow patterns on the walls. They made soft musical sounds as they moved, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. A Kalari delegate clicked by on 6 legs, its insect-like body covered in shiny black armor. The sounds it made were sharp and precise, like a computer processing data. "Remember," Lisa whispered as they walked, "direct eye contact might be considered rude by some species, but ignoring others completely could be seen as insulting. Just follow my lead and try to appear calm and respectful." They were led to a large chamber that reminded Jake of the United Nations building back on Earth, but much bigger. The ceiling was a dome that showed the stars outside, and the walls were lined with different types of seating to accommodate various alien body types. 12 different species were represented, each sitting in their designated area. A tall, graceful being that seemed to be made of flowing energy approached them. This was their first encounter with an ethereal, one of the oldest species in the Confederation. When it spoke, the words seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Welcome, representatives of the species called humans. I am designated speaker Morketh. You will present yourselves to the assembly for preliminary evaluation of your species' potential compatibility with Confederation membership." Jake stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Thank you, designated speaker. I am Commander Jake Morrison, representing the United Earth Government. This is Dr. Lisa Carter, our linguistics specialist, and Dr. Kevin Brooks, our cultural advisor." The ethereal gestured toward a raised platform in the center of the chamber. You will present your species credentials and demonstrate your communication capabilities. Proceed to the ceremonial podium. Jake nodded and began walking toward the platform. The chamber fell silent except for the soft harmonic sounds of the Zephyrians and the quiet clicking of the Kalari. He could feel the attention of dozens of alien beings focused on him, studying his every movement. He was halfway to the podium when it happened. The toe of his right boot caught on a raised section of the floor that he hadn't noticed. Jake stumbled forward, his arms windmilling as he tried to catch his balance. For a moment, he thought he might fall flat on his face in front of the most important alien gathering in human history. He managed to catch himself, but not gracefully. He took 3 quick, awkward steps forward, bent over slightly, and threw his arms out to his sides. The whole thing looked ridiculous, and Jake knew it. Without thinking, he let out a loud laugh at his own clumsiness. "Ha! Well, that's one way to make a first impression," he said, still chuckling as he straightened up and continued to the podium. The effect on the chamber was immediate and dramatic. Every sound stopped. The Zephyrian's harmonic humming ceased. The Kalari stopped clicking. Even the quiet background sounds of the station's ventilation system seemed to become more noticeable in the sudden silence. Jake looked around at the assembled aliens. They were all staring at him with what he could only describe as confusion and shock. Several of the Kalari had tilted their heads to one side, their compound eyes focused intently on him. The Zephyrian's crystals had changed color, shifting from their usual blue-green to a pulsing yellow. The gaseous Vorthic delegates had stopped moving entirely, their cloud-like forms frozen in place. "Commander Morrison," the ethereal speaker said, its voice carrying a tone Jake had never heard before. "Explain the vocalization you just produced." Jake looked back at Lisa and Kevin, who both appeared as confused as the aliens. Lisa stepped forward slightly. "That was laughter," designated speaker. "It's a human emotional response to humor, surprise, or situations that we find amusing." Commander Morrison laughed because he found his own clumsiness funny. "Funny?" A new voice spoke up. This came from one of the Zephyrian delegates, its crystal body pulsing with that strange yellow light. "Define this term," Kevin cleared his throat. "Humor is when we find something amusing or entertaining. It makes us feel good, so we laugh. Laughter is a sound humans make when we're happy or when something surprises us in a pleasant way." The Zephyrian delegate's name, according to the translator, was Prime Resonance Kethmore. Its crystal body chimed softly as it spoke. "This appears to be an inefficient use of energy. Why would an evolved species waste respiratory function on non-essential vocalizations?" Jake had reached the podium by now, but the formal presentation seemed less important than this unexpected conversation. "Well, it's not really a waste. Laughter makes us feel better. It helps us bond with other humans, and it can even help us solve problems by looking at them from a different angle." A Kalari delegate, its translator identifying it as Logic Keeper Zixprim, clicked rapidly. "Emotional responses to unexpected stimuli are primitive survival mechanisms. Our species evolved beyond such inefficiencies millennia ago." "But that's exactly what makes it interesting," Jake said, warming to the topic. "You see, humans use humor to deal with stress, to connect with each other, and to find new ways of thinking about problems. Just now, when I tripped, I could have been embarrassed or angry. Instead, I chose to find it funny." The chamber remained silent for several long moments. Then, one of the Vorthek delegates released a small puff of gas that the translator rendered as, "This concept requires further analysis." Jake looked at his team and then back at the assembled aliens. He realized that he had just introduced something completely foreign to these beings. In all their advanced civilizations, with all their technology and wisdom, they had never experienced the simple joy of laughter. "Would you like me to demonstrate how humor works?" Jake asked the ethereal speaker. Was quiet for a moment before responding. "Proceed with your demonstration, human." Jake thought for a moment, then smiled. "Well, here's something that might be funny to you. I've been studying your languages for months, trying to learn how to communicate with crystal beings who speak in musical tones, insect-like creatures who click in mathematical patterns, and gas cloud entities who talk in chemical reactions. And yet, the first thing I do when I meet you is trip over my own feet and laugh about it. Kevin couldn't help himself. A small chuckle escaped his lips, then Lisa started to giggle. Within seconds, all three humans were laughing together at the absurdity of the situation. The aliens watched this display with intense fascination. Several of them leaned forward in their seats, studying the humans' faces, their body language, the sounds they were making. It was clear that they were witnessing something they had never seen before. When the laughter finally died down, Jake looked around T. 3 weeks had passed since the first meeting at Nexus Prime, and Rachel Stone was beginning to understand why the Confederation had existed for thousands of years without any real change. Everything moved slowly, carefully, and with endless formal procedures. As Earth's new chief ambassador to the Galactic Confederation, she had arrived at the capital world of Centralis Prime with high hopes and detailed plans for humanity's integration into galactic society. Those hopes were being tested daily by the most boring meetings she had ever attended in her life. Rachel sat in the Grand Assembly Chamber, a massive room that could hold representatives from all 47 member species. The walls were made of some kind of smooth metal that reflected sound perfectly, so every word spoken echoed clearly throughout the space. The problem was that most of the words being spoken were incredibly dull. The Subcommittee on Trade Regulation, Subsection 12.7, recommends a review of the preliminary assessment protocols. Drone, the Vorthic delegate, its gas cloud form pulsing slowly as it spoke. The translator made its voice sound flat and emotionless, which Rachel was starting to realize was probably accurate. She glanced at her team members sitting nearby. Dr. Peter Walsh, their psychologist, was taking notes but looked like he was struggling to stay awake. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Blake, their military advisor, had the expression of someone who was seriously considering whether joining the space program had been a mistake. Only Dr. Tony Martinez, their cultural specialist, seemed alert, but Rachel suspected he was mainly fascinated by how different these beings were from humans. The meeting had been going on for 4 hours, and they had covered exactly 3 minor points about trade procedures. Rachel was starting to understand why Jake Morrison had laughed when he tripped at that first meeting. Sometimes the only response to absurdity was to find it funny. After the session finally ended, Rachel was surprised to find a young Kalari waiting for her in the corridor outside the chamber. She recognized him from the files Lisa Carter had sent her. This was Zicthren, the student researcher who had shown interest in learning about human laughter. Ambassador Rachel Stone, the Kalari said, his clicking sound somehow seeming less mechanical than those of the older delegates. I request permission to speak with you privately about the human phenomenon called humor. Rachel looked around to make sure no senior Confederation officials were nearby, then nodded. Of course. Would you like to come to our quarters? That would be acceptable, Zicthren replied. 20 minutes later, they were sitting in the small conference room that had been assigned to the human delegation. Rachel had asked Dr. Walsh to join them, thinking that his background in psychology might be useful for this conversation. I have been studying the recordings from your first meeting, Zicthren began. Commander Morrison's response to his physical mishap was unlike anything in our databases. When he produced the vocalization you call laughter, there was a measurable change in his body chemistry. His stress hormones decreased, his heart rate stabilized, and his brain activity showed increased activity in areas associated with problem-solving and social bonding. Dr. Walsh leaned forward with interest. You've been monitoring our biological responses? All species are monitored during first contact procedures, Zicthren explained matter-of-factly. It is standard safety protocol. But Commander Morrison's response was unprecedented. Instead of fight-or-flight chemicals, his body released what you call endorphins. This created a positive feedback loop that actually improved his performance. During the remainder of the meeting, Rachel found herself smiling at the young Kellery's scientific approach to understanding humor. So you're saying that laughter actually made Jake better at his job? Precisely. But more interesting is that when the other humans began to laugh, they exhibited similar biological improvements, and the effects seemed to be contagious. Several of the younger delegates showed increased brain activity in areas associated with curiosity and pleasure when exposed to the laughter sounds. Dr. Walsh nodded thoughtfully. Laughter is indeed contagious among humans. It's one of the ways we bond socially and share positive experiences. This is what I wish to understand. Zicthren said, how does this sharing work? How can an emotional response be transmitted from one being to another? Rachel thought for a moment, then decided to try a simple demonstration. Dr. Walsh, tell him about what happened during yesterday's meeting with the Zephyrian Trade Council. Dr. Walsh grinned. Well, they were explaining their crystal-based economy, and the lead delegate was trying to describe how they value different types of crystal formations. He kept using the phrase hard currency over and over again. Finally, I couldn't help but point out that for crystal beings, all currency would be hard. Rachel started to chuckle. And then Ambassador Kethmore got confused and asked if we had soft currency, and you said, I said that on Earth we sometimes call it funny money, Dr. Walsh finished, and both humans began laughing. Zzikthren watched them intently, his compound eyes tracking their facial expressions and body language. The shared memory triggered the same positive response in both of you. But why do you find the concept of crystal beings having hard currency amusing? Because it's a pun, Rachel explained. The words hard and soft can refer to both the physical properties of materials and the stability of financial systems. The humor comes from the unexpected connection between the two meanings. Ah, Zicthren clicked thoughtfully. Pattern. Recognition combined with surprise. This explains why Commander Morrison's clumsiness was amusing. The expected pattern would be graceful movement, but the reality was different, creating cognitive dissonance that you resolve through laughter. Exactly, Dr. Walsh said. And sharing that moment of amusement creates a social bond. We feel closer to people we've laughed with. Over the next few days, Rachel began to notice changes in her interactions with certain alien delegates. Word of the humans' unusual emotional responses seemed to be spreading through unofficial channels. Young researchers and junior diplomats began approaching her team members with questions about human behavior. The breakthrough came during a particularly tedious session about environmental protocols. The Confederation had been debating the same 3 points for 2 hours, with each species contributing lengthy statements that said essentially the same thing in different ways. Rachel was doodling in her notebook, trying to stay alert, when she heard the ethereal delegate make an error in the translation system. Instead of saying, we must maintain our environmental vigilance, the translator rendered it as, we must maintain our environmental vegetables. The image of ancient, wise ethereal beings tending to cosmic gardens was so absurd that Rachel snorted, with suppressed laughter. She tried to cover it with a cough, but Dr. Martinez had heard the same mistranslation and was fighting his own battle against the giggles. Did the translator just suggest that the ethereals are cosmic farmers? He whispered to Rachel. That was enough to break her self-control. A small laugh escaped, followed by another, and soon both humans were quietly chuckling while trying to maintain their diplomatic composure. The effect on the chamber was immediate. Several of the younger delegates turned to look at them with curious expressions. The Kellari student researcher Zicthren's mandibles twitched in what Rachel was beginning to recognize as his attempt at mimicking human facial expressions, but the most surprising response came from one of the Vorthic researchers, Flow State. Grixnam, who had been studying human neurochemistry, released a small puff of gas that created swirling patterns in the air. The translator didn't pick up any words, but Rachel could swear the patterns looked almost playful after the session ended. Rachel found herself surrounded by a group of young alien researchers. They peppered her with questions about the mistranslation, about why errors could be amusing, and about how humans dealt with the tedium of long meetings. You find inefficiency amusing? Asked a young Zephyrian named Harmonic Resonance Velkith. Its crystal body pulsed with colors Rachel had never seen before. Sometimes, Rachel admitted. When something is so inefficient that it becomes absurd, yes? Your people have been debating the same environmental protocols for 6 months. At some point, you have to either laugh or cry about it. What is the difference between laughing and crying? Asked ZZ IK-THRN. Dr. Walsh stepped forward. Both are emotional releases, but crying usually happens when we're sad, frustrated, or overwhelmed. Laughter happens when we're happy, surprised, or when we find something amusing. But you could cry about our inefficient meetings? Velkith asked. Theoretically, yes, Rachel said, but it's much more pleasant to laugh about them. The group of young aliens exchanged glances, or what Rachel assumed were glances given their various anatomical structures. She could sense that they were communicating among themselves in ways her translator couldn't pick up. Ambassador Stone. Grixnom said, its gas cloud form shifting into new patterns. Would you be willing to teach us more about human humor? We have established an informal study group. Rachel looked at Dr. Walsh and Dr. Martinez, who both nodded encouragingly. I think that could be arranged. But you should know that humor is different for every human. What one person finds funny, another might not. Dr. Amy Roberts stared at the reports on her desk with a mixture of amazement and concern. As the newly appointed director of the Human Cultural Exchange Program, she had expected some interesting developments as humans began integrating into galactic society. What she had not expected was the flood of urgent communications she had been receiving from across the galaxy. The first report came from the mining colony on Kepler 442b, where human engineer Carlos Rivera had been assigned to help improve extraction efficiency. According to the station commander, productivity had increased by an unprecedented 300%. The catch was that nobody could explain why. Amy opened the detailed report and began reading. Carlos had been working with a team of 12 Zephyrians, crystal beings who had been mining valuable minerals from the planet's core for over 50 years. Their work had always been methodical, efficient, and completely silent except for the harmonic resonances they used to communicate technical information. Then Carlos had introduced them to something called slapstick comedy. It started when I slipped on some loose gravel and fell into a cart full of crystal chips, Carlos had written in his report. The Zephyrians were very concerned about my safety, but when I got up covered in sparkling dust and said I looked like a human disco ball, they seemed confused by my amusement at the situation. Amy shook her head, imagining the scene. Carlos was known for his sense of humor, but she had never expected it to affect alien mining operations. Over the next few weeks, I started sharing simple physical comedy with them, the report continued. I showed them videos of humans slipping on banana peels, walking into glass doors, and getting surprised by everyday objects. The Zephyrians were fascinated by the concept that clumsiness could be entertaining rather than shameful. The results had been extraordinary. The Zephyrians had begun making their own observations about the absurdities of their daily work. They started pointing out when crystal formations looked like familiar objects, when their equipment made funny sounds, or when their careful mining procedures created unexpected results. But the most remarkable discovery was that their laughter, which manifested as harmonic crystal vibrations, actually improved their mining technique. The new frequencies they created, while amused, helped them locate mineral deposits more accurately and extract them more efficiently. They're not just more productive, Carlos wrote, they're more creative. Yesterday, they figured out a completely new way to separate different types of crystals by using the harmonic frequencies they discovered while laughing. 50 years of mining experience, and they learned something new because they were having fun. Amy set down the first report and picked up the second one. This came from Dr. Nina Foster, a xenobiologist working at the research station on Europa 7. What she had found there was even more surprising. Director Roberts, Nina's report began, I think we may have accidentally started a revolution. The research station housed scientists from 15 different species, all working on various projects related to interspecies biology and communication. Nina had been assigned to study how different species processed sensory information, which involved A lot of routine testing and data collection. About 2 months ago, I made a joke about how the calorie researcher Zicthren was more organized than most humans I know, Nina wrote. He asked me to explain what was funny about organization, and I ended up showing him some human comedy about perfectionist behavior. He found it fascinating that humans could find their own flaws amusing. What happened next challenged everything the scientific community thought they knew about alien behavior. The Kalari researchers began making jokes about their own methodical nature. They started pointing out when their obsessive attention to detail created absurd situations. Yesterday, I watched a Kalari scientist spend 3 hours organizing his research notes by color, date, and topic importance, Nina reported. When he finished, he looked at his perfectly arranged workspace and said, "I have achieved maximum efficiency in preparing to be efficient." Then he made a clicking sound that I can only describe as laughter. But the Kalari were not the only ones changing. The Vortex scientists had developed what they called gas stand-up comedy, where they would create amusing shapes and patterns in the air while making observations about their research. The Zephyrians were experimenting with crystal comedy, using their natural harmonic abilities to create light shows that told funny stories. Most shocking of all were the ethereal beings, the ancient race that had helped found the Confederation thousands of years ago. They were known for their wisdom, their serious nature, and their complete lack of emotional expression. 3 of the ethereal researchers have begun what they call humor meditation, Nina wrote. They spend time each day contemplating the absurdities of existence and finding amusement in cosmic paradoxes. One of them told me yesterday that the universe is funny because it's simultaneously infinite and full of very small, worried beings. Like us. Amy put down the second report and walked to the window of her office. Outside, she could see the busy spaceport of Centralus Prime, with ships from dozens of different worlds coming and going. Everything looked normal, but she was beginning to realize that nothing would ever be normal again. The third report was the most alarming. It came from the Confederation Council itself, where the most senior leaders of all member species made decisions about galactic policy. These were beings who had not shown emotion in centuries, who conducted their business with absolute formality and precision. Amy opened the report from Captain Dan Miller, who served as a human liaison to the Council. His message was brief but shocking. Director Roberts, something unprecedented happened in today's council session. Council leader Yanvex was giving his weekly address about maintaining galactic stability when he accidentally referred to the rigorous flexibility of Confederation policies. Several younger delegates made soft sounds that their translators identified as amusement responses. Even more surprising, Yanvex paused his speech and said, "Perhaps that phrase contains more wisdom than I intended." The chamber fell silent, but I swear I detected what might have been approval in the way some of the delegates moved. Amy sat back in her chair, trying to process what she was reading. If laughter was reaching even the highest levels of galactic government, the implications was staggering. Her communication system chimed with an incoming message. The sender was Dr. Greg Martinez, a human sociologist who had been studying the spread of humor through alien societies. His message was marked as urgent. "Amy, you need to see my latest research data immediately. I've been tracking the spread of laughter responses across 17 different worlds, and the pattern is unlike anything we've seen before. It's not just spreading randomly, it's following specific social networks and having measurable effects on everything from crime rates to scientific productivity." Amy opened the attached files and began reading. Greg's research was comprehensive and frightening in its implications. On worlds where laughter had become common, crime rates had dropped by an average of 60%. Scientific breakthrough rates had increased by 40%. Interspecies cooperation had improved dramatically, but most importantly, conflict between different groups had decreased significantly. Species that had maintained cold, formal relationships for centuries were beginning to work together on projects that had nothing to do with official Confederation business. The data suggests that laughter creates social bonds that transcend species boundaries, Greg wrote. When beings share amusement, they develop trust and cooperation instincts that override their natural caution about other species. We're not just teaching aliens to laugh, we're accidentally creating a new form of galactic social structure. Amy's hands were shaking as she read the conclusion of Greg's report. Director Roberts, I believe we need to prepare for the possibility that the Confederation's leadership will see this as a threat to galactic stability. If laughter continues to spread at this rate, it could fundamentally change how the galaxy is governed. As if summoned by her thoughts, her communication system chimed again. This time, the message was from the Confederation Council itself. Amy opened it with growing dread. Director Roberts, you are hereby requested to appear before the Emergency Council session tomorrow at 0800 hours to discuss the cultural contamination spreading from human populations to member species. Failure to appear will result in the immediate suspension of Earth's provisional membership in the Galactic Confederation. Amy stared at the message. The word contamination stood out like a threat. The council leaders were not seeing laughter as a gift. They were seeing it as a disease that needed to be stopped. She immediately sent messages to all human cultural advisors across the galaxy, warning them that the situation was about to become very serious. Then she began preparing for what might be the most important meeting in human history. The next morning, Amy walked into the Grand Council chamber with her heart pounding. The chamber was fuller than she had ever seen it, with representatives from all 47 member species present. The atmosphere was tense, formal, and completely lacking in the warmth she had grown used to in her interactions with the younger aliens. The emergency alarm echoed through the halls of Confederation Central Command as Admiral Zexquan stared at the reports covering his desk. Each document carried the same disturbing news. The human behavior called laughter was spreading faster than any disease the galaxy had ever seen. What made it worse was that beings seemed to want to catch it. This is a crisis of unprecedented magnitude, the Admiral declared to his assembled staff. In 3 months, we have documented laughter outbreaks on 147 worlds. Military discipline is breaking down. Trade protocols are being ignored. Species that have maintained formal relationships for millennia are suddenly forming unauthorized social bonds. His aide, a rigid Kalari named Orderkeeper Vexthrim, clicked nervously. Admiral, the Hegemony Council has voted. Humanity's membership in the Confederation must be suspended immediately. All humans must be recalled to Earth, and all contaminated species must undergo behavioral reconditioning. Admiral Zexquan nodded grimly. Issue the order. And make sure our communications channels are secure. We cannot allow this contamination to reach our own forces. But it was already too late. 3,000 light-years away on the border world of Terminus 9, Lieutenant Dan Cooper was about to make the Admiral's worst fears come true. Dan was monitoring routine communications from his post in the orbital station above Terminus 9 when a distress signal came through. A Kelari cargo vessel had suffered navigation system failure and was drifting toward the planet's asteroid field. This is Terminus Station responding to distress call, Don replied. What's your current status? Navigation computer has ceased functioning, came the reply in the clicking sounds that translated to perfect Kelari formality. We are unable to calculate safe passage through asteroid field. Request immediate assistance. Dan looked at his instruments and shook his head. The Kelari ship was indeed in trouble, but the cause was obvious from his readings. Well, there's your problem. Your navigation computer seems to have the directional sense of a drunk asteroid. Have you tried turning it off and back on again? There was silence from the Kelari ship. Then, unexpectedly, a series of rapid clicks came through the communication system. Dan's translator struggled for a moment before producing, "Drunk asteroid exhibits superior navigation to our current system." More clicking followed, and Don realized he was hearing something remarkable. The entire Kelari crew was laughing. Not the quiet, suppressed amusement he had heard from younger aliens at diplomatic meetings, but genuine, uncontrolled laughter that seemed to surprise them as much as it surprised him. "Did we just make a joke?" one of the Kelari asked. "I believe we did," another replied. "And it was enjoyable." Don grinned as he began transmitting navigation coordinates to the ship. Welcome to the wonderful world of humor, friends. Fair. Warning, it's addictive. Unknown to Don, their entire conversation was being broadcast on open subspace channels. Standard protocol required all border communications to be recorded and transmitted to Central Command for security monitoring. Within hours, the recording of a human making jokes with a Kalari crew was spreading through the galaxy's communication networks. The effect was immediate and dramatic. On the industrial world of Sigma 7, Zephyrian workers began incorporating humorous observations into their harmonic work songs. Their productivity increased by 40%, but more importantly, they began looking forward to their shifts for the first time in decades on the research station orbiting Alpha Centauri. A group of Vorthic scientists discovered that certain gas combinations could create amusing visual effects. They started experimenting with what they called comedy chemistry, developing entirely new fields of research that combined entertainment with scientific discovery. Even the mysterious void dwellers, beings that existed partially outside normal space-time, began experimenting with what they called temporal comedy, jokes that existed in multiple dimensions, simultaneously and could only be understood by beings who experienced time in nonlinear ways. Dr. Amy Roberts, now serving as Earth's Special Advisor on Cultural Integration, found herself at the center of a galaxy-wide phenomenon that had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined. Her office on Centralis Prime had become an unofficial headquarters for what the media was calling the laughter revolution. The data is incredible, she told her team during their daily briefing. We're not just talking about a few isolated incidents anymore. Entire species are developing their own forms of humor. The Crystalline Confederacy has created something called light comedy, where they tell jokes using focus beam patterns. The Deep Sea Coalition on Aquatica Prime has developed pressure humor that can only be experienced at extreme ocean depths. Dr. Greg Martinez, who had been traveling between worlds to document the spread of laughter, added his latest findings. It's not just spreading randomly, Amy. Laughter follows social networks, trade routes, and communication channels. But more importantly, it's evolving. Each species is developing humor that reflects their own culture and biology. The most significant development came from an unexpected source. Captain Steve Renaud's, a human trader who had been working the Outer Rim territories, sent a message that changed everything. You're not going to believe this, Steve's message began. I was trading with a group of ethereal merchants on the edge of Void Walker space when they started telling me jokes. Ethereal beings, making jokes about the meaning of existence. Steve's attached recording was extraordinary. The ancient ethereal beings, known for their serious contemplation of cosmic mysteries, had developed what they called existential comedy. They found humor in the paradoxes of the universe, the absurdity of finite beings trying to understand infinite concepts, and the irony of serious beings learning to laugh. One of them told me that the funniest thing in the universe is that consciousness exists at all, Steve reported. He said that if the universe were truly logical, nothing would be aware enough to notice how illogical it actually is. Then they all started making this weird harmonic vibration that I can only describe as cosmic laughter. But the report that truly alarmed the Confederation leadership came from the military sector. Commander Lisa Park, serving aboard the patrol ship UES Guardian, had been assigned to monitor hegemony fleet movements near the border systems. What she discovered sent shockwaves through both human and alien command structures. Admiral Zex Kwan's own fleet is compromised, Lisa reported, in a coded transmission. I intercepted communications between hegemony ships and they're sharing jokes. The crew members have been exposed to laughter through captured human broadcasts, and it's spreading through their ranks faster than their officers can contain it. The recording Lisa provided was damning evidence. Hegemony fleet personnel, trained from birth to maintain absolute discipline and emotional control, were making jokes about their own rigid protocols. They had begun calling their Admiral Zex Kwan the Serious and had developed an entire underground comedy network within the fleet. The best part, one hegemony soldier was heard saying. Is that our training to suppress emotions has made us really good at deadpan humor? We can deliver the most ridiculous statements with completely straight faces. Amy realized that the Confederation leadership was facing their worst nightmare. Laughter had not only spread throughout civilian populations but had infiltrated the very military forces that were supposed to contain it. The crisis reached its breaking point when reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. On the Confederation's most controlled worlds, where behavior modification and emotional suppression were strictly enforced, underground laughter clubs were forming. Beings who had not experienced joy in centuries were secretly gathering to share jokes, funny stories, and moments of genuine happiness. The underground movement had its own heroes. A Vorthek comedian named Flow State Jixnor had become famous throughout the gas giant systems for creating comedy shows that could only be experienced by breathing specific atmospheric mixtures. A Zephyrian named Crystal Song Melon had developed harmonic comedy routines that turned entire crystal formations into living joke-telling machines. Most remarkably, the different species had begun collaborating on interspecies comedy. Kelari click-pattern comedians worked with Zephyrian light show artists and Vorthek gas sculptors to create entertainment experiences that no single species could have imagined alone. The movement even had its own underground communication network. Using modified trade channels and hidden message protocols, beings across the galaxy shared jokes, comedy recordings, and humorous observations about their daily lives. They called themselves the Cosmic Comedy Collective. Dr. Amy Roberts received a secret message from this network that made her realize how far things had gone. Director Roberts, we are beings from 47 different worlds who have discovered something our leaders tried to keep from us. Joy. We do not want to return to the gray existence of formal protocols and emotional emptiness. If the Confederation leadership tries to take laughter away from us, they will face the first galaxy-wide rebellion in 10,000 years, and it will be the happiest rebellion in history. Amy showed the message to her team, and they all understood the magnitude of what had happened. The largest gathering in galactic history filled the space around Centralus Prime. Ships from every corner of the galaxy had come to witness what many believed would be the end of the Confederation as they knew it. Ambassador Kate Mitchell stood on the observation deck of the human flagship UES Unity, watching as vessels from hundreds of different worlds formed a protective circle around the capital planet. "Have you ever seen anything like this?" asked Captain Ben Harper, the ship's commander. Kate shook her head in amazement. "Never. Look at them, Ben. Kalari ships flying in formation with Zephyrian crystal vessels. Vorthek gas clouds moving alongside. Ethereal energy beings. 6 months ago, most of these species barely spoke to each other outside of formal meetings. What made the gathering even more remarkable was the atmosphere. Instead of the grim tension of a military standoff, there was an almost festival-like quality to the assembled fleet. Ships were broadcasting entertainment signals to each other. Laughter could be heard on open communication channels. Some vessels had actually decorated their hulls with lights and patterns that created visual jokes. Visible from space, on the planet below, an even more extraordinary scene was unfolding. The streets of Centralus Prime were filled with the largest peaceful demonstration in galactic history. Beings from 38 different species had come together to show their support for what they now called the right to laugh. The demonstration was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Kelari protesters marched in perfectly organized groups while chanting humorous slogans in their clicking language. Zephyrian crystals created light shows that told funny stories about the absurdity of banning joy. Vorthek clouds formed amusing shapes in the sky that spelled out jokes in a dozen different languages. At the center of it all was Dr. Amy Roberts, who had become the unofficial leader of what the media was calling the Laughter Liberation Movement. She stood on a platform in the Grand Plaza, addressing the crowd through translators that carried her words to every species present. 6 months ago, a human named Jake Morrison tripped over his own feet and laughed about it, Amy said. Today, a simple moment of joy has grown into something that spans the galaxy. We are not here to overthrow governments or start wars. We are here to defend something much more precious, the right to find happiness in our daily lives." The crowd responded with a sound unlike anything ever heard on Centralist Prime, Kalari. Clicking mixed with Zephyrian harmonic chimes, Vorthak gas whooshes blended with ethereal energy hums, and dozens of other species added their own unique forms of laughter to create a symphony of joy that echoed through the city, but not everyone was celebrating. In the heavily guarded Confederation Command Center, Admiral Zexquan was preparing for what he saw as the final battle for galactic civilization. "The situation has deteriorated beyond all acceptable parameters," he told his assembled staff. "These beings have been infected with a behavioral virus that threatens 10,000 years of stable government. If we allow this chaos to continue, the Confederation will collapse into anarchy." His aide, Orderkeeper Vexthrim, presented the latest intelligence reports. "Admiral, our attempts to suppress the laughter outbreak have failed completely. Even our own personnel have been compromised. 3 of our senior commanders were found organizing comedy shows for their troops." Admiral Zexquan's frustration was evident in his rigid posture. "Then we have no choice. Activate the hegemony fleet. If these infected populations will not submit to behavioral reconditioning voluntarily, we will enforce compliance through military action." But as the Admiral issued his orders, something unexpected was happening in the most important building on Centralist Prime, deep within the ancient towers of the Confederation Council. Council leader Yanvex was having the most unusual experience of his 3,000-year existence. Yanvex had been studying the reports about laughter for months, trying to understand how this human behavior had spread so rapidly through the galaxy. As an ethereal being, he was supposed to be above such primitive emotional responses. His species had evolved beyond the need for joy, anger, fear, or any of the messy feelings that younger species still experienced, but lately something had been changing inside him. He found himself noticing things he had never paid attention to before. The way junior staff members had begun smiling when they delivered reports. The subtle changes in how different species interacted with each other. The energy and creativity that seemed to flow through meetings that would have been deadly boring just a few months earlier. Most disturbing of all, he had begun to find certain situations amusing. The previous day, during a formal trade negotiation, a Kalari delegate had accidentally referred to the rigid flexibility of our shipping schedules. Instead of correcting the obvious contradiction, Yanvex had found himself appreciating the unintended wisdom in the phrase. How could schedules be both rigid and flexible? The logical impossibility was somehow now, as he prepared for what might be the most important council session in galactic history. Yanvex made a decision that would change everything. The emergency council session was called to order with all 47 member species in attendance. The chamber was packed beyond capacity with representatives from every world that had experienced the laughter phenomenon. The tension was palpable as Admiral Zexquan rose to address the assembly. "Honored Council," the Admiral began, "we face a crisis that threatens the very foundation of galactic civilization. The behavioral contamination that began with human contact has spread beyond our ability to contain it through normal means. I am here to request authorization for military intervention to restore order to the affected populations." A murmur went through the chamber. Military intervention against member species was unprecedented in Confederation history. Furthermore, Admiral Zexquan continued, "I recommend the immediate expulsion of humanity from the Confederation and the establishment of quarantine protocols to prevent future contamination events." Dr. Amy Roberts, who had been granted permission to address the council, stood to respond. "Honored council members, Admiral Zexquan speaks of contamination and infection, but what we have witnessed is not a disease. It is an awakening. For the first time in millennia, beings across the galaxy are experiencing joy, creativity, and genuine connection with each other." She gestured to a data display that showed statistics from across the galaxy. Crime rates are down 60% on worlds where laughter has become common. Scientific innovation has increased by 40%. Interspecies cooperation has reached levels never before recorded. How can the Admiral call this a crisis when it has clearly made the galaxy a better place? The chamber erupted in discussion as delegates from different species shared their own experiences. Young representatives spoke passionately about how laughter had improved their lives and their work. Older delegates expressed concern about maintaining traditional values and protocols. Then, in the midst of the heated debate, something extraordinary happened. Council leader Yanvex rose from his ancient seat and called for silence. "I have led this confederation for 3,000 years," he began, his voice carrying the weight of ages. "In that time, I have witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations, the birth and death of stars, and the endless cycle of galactic politics. I have seen war and peace, prosperity and hardship, order and chaos." The chamber fell completely silent. When Yanvex spoke, the galaxy listened. "What I have not seen in all those centuries is genuine happiness. I have seen contentment, satisfaction, the absence of conflict. But I have never seen beings experience the pure joy that has spread through our galaxy in these past months." He paused, and when he continued, there was something different in his voice. Something that had not been there for 3,000 years. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that the future of galactic civilization would depend on learning to laugh, I would have questioned their sanity. But I have been studying this phenomenon, and I have discovered something remarkable. Laughter does not make beings less intelligent or less capable. It makes them more creative, more cooperative, and more willing to find solutions to problems. That seemed impossible. The chamber remained absolutely silent as one of the oldest beings in the galaxy continued his unprecedented speech. "I have also discovered something personal," Yanvex said. "For 3,000 years I have lived without joy. I told myself this was wisdom, that emotions were primitive and unnecessary. But I was wrong. A life without laughter is not wisdom. It is merely existence." Then, to the amazement of everyone present, Council Leader Yanvex did something no ethereal had done in recorded history. He told a joke. "Admiral Zexquan warns us that laughter will bring chaos to our orderly galaxy." He said, "But I ask you, what kind of order exists when nobody is happy to be part of it? We have spent 10,000 years building a civilization so efficient that we forgot to include any reason to enjoy living in it." The laughter that erupted from the council chamber was heard across the capital city. It started with the younger delegates, spread to the middle-aged representatives, and finally reached even the most ancient and formal members of the assembly. For the first time in galactic history, the Confederation Council was laughing together.